This is Adam Clayton on U2X Radio, and we're going to shake things up a bit this week. I normally do a show with a playlist, and we kind of go through it and kind of have an intimate moment together, but I got bored with that. I wanted to, because I'm a bass player, and this show is called Don't Ask Me, I'm the bass player, but I wanted to meet some of the people that have influenced me, some of the people who love other bass players, and we're going to talk about it. And if that doesn't float your boat, you're going to have to wait till Edge does a show. But that's what we're going to be doing. And if we get a bit too deep on the bass, we'll try and pull back. But try and follow us. This is going to be a great hour. I'm here with Mike Dirnt from Green Day, who's in Ireland. He's playing back-to-back Dookie and American Idiot, which are two amazing albums separated by about 10 years. And Mike met Billy Joe Armstrong in the school cafeteria when they were 10 years old. They began playing guitars together after school, learning songs by the Ramones, Ozzy, Def Leppard, AC/DC. So, welcome to the house of Joshua. This is indeed the Joshua Tree House, and Mike Dirnt, it's so nice to see you again.
Thank you for having me, and wow, what a full circle month it's been, because right before we headed out on this tour, my wife took me out to Joshua Tree for my first time. We actually went hiking through Joshua Tree National Forest and got to actually, or National Park, I should say, and got to clear my headspace and get ready for all of the sensory overload the tour is.
Yeah, I think when we spoke last week, you said you're just doing a lot of shows a week, and
yeah, the heavy lifting part of this tour is now over. We had a run in this tour. It's just, sometimes it lines up where the opportunity is there, so you have to take advantage of it, you know, and at this time of year, there's a lot of festivals, and then we had a lot of our own shows, so it ended up being 2 shows on, 1 show off, 2 shows on, 1 show off, and as it added up, it was like 11 shows in 14 days. So it was quite a bit, because we're playing Dookie in its entirety, we're playing American Idiot in its entirety, and we're playing songs off of Saviors and other hits as well, so it's quite an undertaking.
Yeah, and that's the kind of shows you'd have been doing when you were promoting Dookie. I'm sure you'd been playing that many shows a week.
Yeah, only back then we were kind of the kings of like the 37-minute set to an hour, you know.
They were great, those short sets. Once you get outdoors, everything gets longer. Mm-hmm. Can we go back to those early days when you first got turned on to music? You're probably like me, you know, you were invisible until you picked up an instrument and suddenly you realized you were a powerful, attractive human being.
Yeah, Billy and I had that in common. We were both latchkey kids, and it's funny, the first conversation he and I ever had was about writing music. But before that, you know, recently occurred to me that it was probably late 79, 1980 is when music started to change for me. It started to go from the background to being right in front of my face, you know, and starting to feel important to me, and or go, whoa, that feels cool. Yeah. That feels different and makes me feel something.
Right. And how were you engaging with music at that time? Was there a community of you that kind of played things together?
So at that time, I was jostled between my mom and my dad's house. I had sort of a tumultuous upbringing to that point. And so I was really locked into my radio next to my bed. And I will give it this. My mom's side, when they split up, my mom always had things playing, like it could be anything from Fleetwood Mac to Anita Ward to the Gap Band to to War. My dad, on the other hand, always had rock and roll playing, and then in my room I had basically rock and pop hits.
Right.
Back when radio was a little more focused on individual styles, but it sort of made my tastes a little bit more era-driven and more genre fluid, like things are now on your iPhone or whatever.
Yeah, I think when I was growing up, which was, you know, the mid-70s, you know, we were listening to disco as much as pop, as much as rock at the time. Yeah. And I think people tended to forget that as it was genre-driven radio. You couldn't listen to those other types of music.
I also think there's a thing with our generation where the innovators of rock and roll were still being played on the radio.
Yeah,
back
you could
then.
still hear Elvis.
Correct.
You could still hear
the Beatles. You could still hear, anything from Led Zeppelin to, I mean, you name it. It was that much closer to the core of where it came from.
So then it did change around 1976. I mean, I don't know what was happening in American radio, but certainly a huge influence on U2. The game changer was actually the Ramones. Mm-hmm. And from a bass playing point of view, Dee Dee had it all. He drove the band and he wrote the songs.
Well, for me, it was funny because growing up pretty poor, the Ramones didn't kick in for me until I picked up a skateboard and started hanging out with some of my friends back when I was around 13 or 14.
Right.
I think those few years prior to that, MTV was a big driving force in the States. Right around 1980 is when, especially in the suburbs, they had that "I want my MTV" thing going on, and it was big because the people that wanted it the most were the people that had it the least.
Yeah.
We didn't have a record store in my town.
Yeah.
We had one for 1 week and it shut down.
Well, I think MTV drove the culture because we noticed that at the time. In an era where we couldn't necessarily get played on the radio, if you looked cool and were played on MTV, people knew who you were.
Yeah, and that went all the way forward to when we got famous. I mean, MTV was a huge, driving force in us getting, in Green Day getting big at the time too. I do miss being able to have it on in the background and have that sort of visual without having to search quite the same way. Just because to me it's kind of like putting on a record and listening to a whole album. There's a little more to it. So.
Yeah, I think I always used to put it on when I was in the gym because I found I was into the competitiveness of it, and I liked the fact that the culture was kind of coming into your life at that point, so you could follow the trends of what was going.
Yeah, and be inspired by again a little closer to the root of maybe some of the innovators were making a difference and really getting in on the action at the time.
So you've come here with some tracks that we're going to play through and we're going to talk a bit. So the Ramones is number one on your list, and this is
okay. I'll preface it with this. I don't think there's any order here. Because I don't think anybody could choose 5 tracks that truly define. Well, somebody might be able to. I can't. But these are the ones for me when I was turned on to music, as I would say. And that's when I was probably around 13 or 14, and that's when a light bulb went off, and it made me start to feel like that sort of existential crisis you have when you're 13 or 14. You think, who am I? What's my place in this world? Where am I going? Where have I been? And and you try to make sense of those things. And music is such a huge part of that.
You're looking for your tribe.
Yeah.
You're turned on and looking for your tribe, and the Ramones were there. They were there for us anyway. We auditioned for a record deal and a TV show by pretending we'd written a Ramones song. we were playing a couple of Ramones songs back then. You're here with Mike Dirnt and Adam Clayton on U2X Radio, and we'll come back and talk about how important this song was for both of us.
You're listening to Adam Clayton's playlist with Mike Dirnt on U2X Radio.
Wow, that really swings, doesn't it?
It does.
And it's delivered with such poise.
It screams of somehow they had this beautiful way of making their own wall of sound happen in a sort of Phil Spector way or something. Obviously they worked with him later, but they had this thing, and it was also a unified sound, a unified look, a unified sound of 4 individuals.
Yeah. And they brought back the 3-minute pop song. I mean, and the fast song. I think you guys probably play a bit faster than them, but
well, and the Ramones always had heart, and I feel like that's the one thing my favorite bands have always had is a vulnerability to them, because if you're able to be that vulnerable, that means you're being that honest, and you're looking in the mirror, and that's really hard to do as a songwriter.
Yeah, and I think along with that heart, there was this misfit culture as well. None of them were considered beautiful or cool in their own kind of area, but together they had a kind of menace and an innocence, a vulnerability with it.
Yeah, it was very relatable for people who just didn't relate to anything.
Yeah. So when do you think you heard your first Ramones track?
Well, probably when I would go so far as say like 12 or 13 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
So really.
Yeah, really late bloomer in that regard. Didn't, again, had the radio. I maybe heard it on the radio, but it didn't click.
Yeah. I think also what we relate to is these 4-piece lineups. I mean, you guys are a 3-piece, but you bring in a couple of extra guys live. But there's something about that strength of it just being 4 guys making a noise, in the room.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge thing for us. Is one, I feel like I like really good songs that work around the campfire.
Yeah.
Give me an acoustic guitar and it's still a good song and we got something to work with.
Yeah.
But that said, as a 3-piece, we write and we record as a 3-piece. And, if the power goes off and there's 2 acoustic guitars and a box and some sticks, we can do the whole set still.
Yeah.
It's really important that we be able to do everything that we record live, just the 3 of us.
Yeah. And I think, you never lose that connection with, the fact that you would do anything before you had a record deal to kind of grab an audience.
Yeah, it's authenticity.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. And what's it like going back and playing Dookie now?
It's actually really fun. And for as simple a record as it is to play, my hands are telling me it's quite muscular.
Yeah.
There's a lot to it. And it also just doesn't stop. It's bam, 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 bam. It's 28 minutes of nonstop, power pop or power pop punk, but a lot of the songs are still relatable to this day. Some of them even more so.
For us and you too, when we started to go back and look at those early songs, I was kind of amazed at how great they were. I kind of just remembered them as kind of struggling, embryonic songwriting and thought I didn't think too much of them. But you go back and you go, how did we do that? How did we think about that?
It's honesty.
Yeah.
Honesty is timeless, It's I don't know who said it, but it's like, what is it, 4 chords and the truth?
Yeah. Well, it's all you need, and 4 fingers.
Sometimes 3 chords.
Well, the other record which you came in with, which of course, I mean, this guy just casts a shadow over all bass players, and that is The Who's My Generation with John Entwistle.
I mean, he's the original lead bass player. John Entwistle taught everybody how to fill in the space in between, and in such an original, imitable way. It's like how... I can't even fathom what was going on in his brain while his fingers were doing something completely different.
Yeah.
We played with them years ago at the Bridge School benefit, which is a Neil Young benefit that he does every year. And he was playing these beautiful Taylor acoustic basses, and watching his fingers fly was just unbelievable. I mean, he's sitting there he was using all 4 fingers.
Yeah.
The only time I use all 4 of my fingers is when I'm holding a coffee cup or putting my hand in my mouth. It's crazy.
There's one other thing you could be doing.
My fist in my mouth.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, what was he thinking as he was doing all of that?
Yeah, I just think he was so good. He had a stream of consciousness, and so you got to hear his entire personality on his bass. And I had a really good, about hour and a half long conversation with him one night, and understood about 10 minutes worth of it.
Yeah.
He had a really thick accent, but we would just go back and forth, and he really loved his 12-inch speakers, and it's because he had to cut through with that treble cut through the big guitars, which he and I were relating on at the time because every album we have, pretty much the guitars have gotten bigger and bigger, and I've had to find a new space. Even on this last record, Trey has 2 floor toms in his kick drum, and then Billy's guitars are getting bigger, and it's like low-end gentrification here. Like, I'm going to have to move out of my own neighborhood here pretty soon.
You have 2 choices. You go lower and you get under them, or you go above them.
Yeah, you got to kind of, I sort of poke through in the middle with the, 2K or some sort of mid-range punch, and then fill in the low end. But it's a little different than having, your own room to play around in.
Yeah. Well, he certainly drove me on a quest for sound, and the technique, I just never thought I'd be able to kind of catch up with him. I mean, the way he just hammers the bass.
There's guys that play rock and roll bass. There's guys like that, Jack Bruce, and people that you look at and just go, how are you doing that? Like, how are you? And singing is a big part of, for me, it's a big part of great bass playing too, is, or of great band bass playing, is that they have, if you watch their rock and roll circus, they did a quick one. Yeah. We covered it years ago, and it's phenomenal. Yeah. The 3-part harmonies, 3 and sometimes 4, it seemed like, part harmonies they were doing.
Well, I always find when there's a bass player that's also a singer, the choice of notes that they pick to support their voice is always, it's kind of a gray area for me, because I wouldn't necessarily think that way, but they know what they need for their voice, and McCartney in particular is like that.
I found myself in trouble a few times, going, sort of rubbing my stomach and patting my head at the same time, because I will write the bass lines around. I'll either be writing to the vocal, or I will be playing off of what Trey is playing. Unbeknownst to me, there's a harmony that's supposed to go there that's in Billy's head.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh boy. So now I got to learn how to play and sing this at the same time.
Yeah.
So, but you make it work.
Yeah. Well, look, let's listen to John Entwistle and that amazing solo, which must have been the first solo on a pop single at the time.
Yeah, and this also was one of the first covers that we ever did as a band, or me and Billy ever did as a band. We recorded it on a 7-inch when we were really young, and it's just, when you listen without huge distorted guitars or anything, it's just a powerful song.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very simple. I think it's something we did. We didn't do the bass solo, but we did the rest of it. Okay, The Who.
You're listening to Adam Clayton's playlist with Mike Dirnt on U2X Radio.
Okay, I'm going to have to pull you back, Mike, because we're off in bass nerd world. This is Mike Dirnt and Adam Clayton on U2X Radio, and we're talking about The Who, My Generation, which you just heard there.
Oh, I mean, so that song not only was that song one of the first things we ever covered, but actually the other night, we were, after many, many years of wanting to play the Isle of Wight Festival, we were fortunate enough to actually get to headline that and finish out the weekend, and what an amazing show. Afterwards, so I wear this jumper, sort of like, like a mechanic suit.
Yeah.
And Billy skipped a song, which is where I do my change. And so I ended up wearing it for another 13 songs. I was just dying in this thing. Yeah. But somebody pointed out afterwards that Pete Townsend wore a white jumper when they played it at the Isle of Wight. And I was like, well, that's pretty dang cool if you think about it. Like, on my end, I didn't put 2 and 2 together till that evening. But man, what a show.
Yeah. Actually, that Isle of Wight show was fantastic, because you had Jimi Hendrix on as well.
Yeah.
And The Who were just such a kinetic live band. And, back in the day, they would fight on stage. Keith Moon would kind of kick the drums over. And that was really revolutionary at the time. That wasn't show business. That was aggression. That was rock and roll.
Yeah. I think that's normal when you have... your bandmates are like your brothers, and you're going to fight. It happens. You're passionate. You're excited. Sometimes one guy's really excited. The other guy's going through something else. Stuff happens. But, it's amazing how quick you can squash those things. You can be hot one minute and just turn it right off again and get back focused on what the most important thing is, and that is this opportunity to create music has always been the paramount thing.
We're all incredibly lucky. I mean, I think the first time I met you, you said if this hadn't worked out for you, you'd be flipping burgers, because that's what you were doing back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, you never forget that.
Yeah, you're much better off flipping discs than burgers.
So I think we could move on to the next tune, which this is one of my favorite bass lines, just because it is so incredibly simple. And it's Queen, and it's Under Pressure.
Same. So I think he may, but in my opinion, I don't think that Deacon gets nearly enough praise. I think he is one of the greatest bass players I've ever heard.
Yeah, and Another One Bites the Dust. I mean, whether or not it was all him, or whether, you know, there was an influence of, I don't know, Chic and whatever in there, it's still an amazing deliverance.
Every night we open our show and we play a portion of We Are the Champions. And if you listen to the bass lines, it's what he does, this great little descending line, do 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 do, and within that little bass line, he plays some other notes, and it's not so much what he's playing, it's the pauses between when he's playing that just make such an impact. And I pointed it out to a few of our other guitar players that we have on tour, and they were like, I have never heard that before. And I'm like, yeah, it's the spaces in between, you know.
You know, it's funny. I think you don't know what a player is really hearing when he's playing, because sometimes, you know, I find with one of my own parts, I'm not listening to what everybody else is listening to. I'm picking up on something else in the drums, and I'm playing something around that, and it's in a different place.
My wife put on so we use in-ears on stage. I'm sure you do at this point too. You know, because I'd lost so much hearing. I'm like, we got to put some hearing. Plus, the vocals are very important for us live. Yeah. And my wife put on an in-ear pack with some headphones. For the first time, she hadn't done this in, I don't know, 17 years. And I stepped on stage, and she's like, I had no idea all the things you're doing and what your mix sounds like. Yeah. And it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I keep, every so often I think, I'd love to know what Edge is listening to, or Larry's listening to, or Bono, just so I know, you know, how big the bass is for them. It's, you know, they're probably listening to something completely different.
Yeah. Well, as bass players too, you know, if we turn our bass up to 2, everyone tells us to turn it down. But if they turn their bass to 11, we can't tell them to turn it down.
The guitar, yeah. It's true.
I'd love to hear the whole mix. I think I took for granted how I got to listen to everything when I was younger.
Yeah.
But now my ears are so beat up, I got to protect them a little bit more.
Yeah.
And when I get that really sweet mix, it's a beautiful moment, because you're like, man, I can hear the guitars, the drums, everything really nicely right now.
And it's liberating, because you're actually not thinking of what's wrong. You're just going, this sounds right.
Correct.
And going back to John Deacon, I think he's very interesting, because he embodies, to me, the spirit of the bass player, which is kind of not wanting to be out front, not wanting to be noticed too much. And in that band, they were a pop band in the early part of their life, and they kind of dressed up in kind of pop clothes, and they wore all that white stuff with capes. He never seemed comfortable with it, but yet he was doing these great tunes on the bass. And it's just a shame we don't have him in the band anymore. I really miss him.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I could sort of relate to that. I like what we do and the acknowledgement of everything that we do, but you know, it's just like even like being funny or telling jokes or doing whatever. I like the moment of it, but I only get the courage after I do the thing I'm afraid of, which is going on stage every night.
Yeah.
You know, I really sort of got into the wrong business, but I'm grateful for it, and I get the courage. I think I enjoy the high that I get after the show, because it's kind of like skydiving, right? You land and you go, wow, that was great.
Yeah, it's kind of the last place I would choose to be, but when I'm there, it's the only place I'd want to be.
Yeah.
You know. Let's listen to Queen, Under Pressure.
You're listening to Adam Clayton's playlist with Mike Dirnt on U2X Radio.
You're here with Adam Clayton and Mike Dirnt from Green Day. We're here in Dublin because Green Day are playing their set of Dookie and American Idiot. That was Queen. We're both big fans of that really minimal bass line. And it's an unusual rhythm as much as anything else.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Again, I like it when you can hear all the personalities of a band, and I think John Deacon, there's a lot of these, whether it be the band that spoke to me as a kid or the bass player specifically, and I say this as table talk with me and you speaking, but, kind of playing with your friends in high school, or in elementary school and high school, and all the way up to whatever. You want to get a show, then you want to get out of your town, then you want to get a gig, then you eventually want to headline it, get a tour, blah, blah. It goes all the way up, and you finally get to the very top there, and you want to be the biggest band in the world. And whether you get there or not, a lot of these bands for a minute you are, or you're not, or whatever. At some point you realize it's not about being the biggest or the best. It's ending up in the pantheon of it doesn't get any better than this.
Yeah.
And there are albums and bands and moments that you can genuinely say, no matter what kind of music you're listening to, no matter what kind of artistry it is, you can say, for what this is, it just doesn't get any better than this.
Yeah. And you've honored yourself, you know. One of the things that means so much to me now is that gratitude of being on that road with the same bunch of guys. Yeah, you fought, maybe you fell out a few times over a few things, but you've been there for each other, and you've seen the world together, and it was music that did that for you.
Yeah, and I mean, they are not just a chapter, they're part of the story of your whole life at that point, and you have your family, you choose your friends.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the other way around too.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up to the end of our hour, and we're at track 4 and 5 of your tunes, and I was interested in these two because they weren't really on my radar. They were kind of a later generation of bands. So the first track is from the Violent Femmes, and it's Blister in the Sun.
Yeah. So that song, when I was probably, I think, 13 or 14, I don't know how it was received over here, but one, the bass was loud acoustic bass, which you never heard, and it had a lot of personality, and he was playing his butt off. And also, the song was sort of eye-opening. The band was genre-bending, and I think it was just a little bit like for the Outliers. It came from a place where a lot of people could relate to it. You didn't have to be from any subsect.
Yeah.
You didn't have to know about anything to like it.
Yeah.
And
you
the bass
have
player
to speak French.
Yeah.
So okay, well let's roll that, and thank you, Mike. Hey, we're back. This is Mike Dirnt in Dublin with Green Day, and we are getting it together. We are hanging out, we're talking bass, and actually we were just talking about the bass part on Longview on the Dookie album, which they're playing on this tour. Was it fun to go back to that record? Dust it off?
Yeah, that's been a staple since that was our first big hit. It's funny because, I had mentioned, when I was younger, I may or may not have been, well, I definitely was, on LSD when I wrote the first half of that bass line. The second half of that bass line I wrote sober, and I was like, okay, I can do this. This wasn't a fluke for writing that kind of bass line. But again, the song is just screams of like youth and boredom and masturbation.
And it's been in your set ever since, so it stood the test of. There's a couple of classics there. I mean, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, it brings the house down.
Yeah, American Idiot, it's wild how every year it seems like it just becomes more and more relevant. But I think that the subject matter in it is universal.
I think what you're able to say as Americans about America is kind of extraordinary. Because for foreigners we couldn't say that, but you really do define where America is at now, and it needs to be said.
In a weird way, though, as foreigners, you did say it because we got our perspective by touring, outside of America young, and getting the global perspective, and bringing that home and looking around and going, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
And posing the question rather than the solution. I remember there's a song from a band called Crimshine that I really liked when I was younger, and they had a song called Question Everything, and I always thought that was a great title.
Yeah, great title. Yeah, it's, I started going to America 40 years ago. I mean, first time would have been, 1980 type of thing when our Boy record was released. And back then, it was all positive, we could do anything then, and America had done lots of things, and we loved that spirit, and it served its people well, and now it doesn't seem to be serving its people well, and that's a terrible thing to see.
Yeah, we're definitely really polarizing right now, and we've lost nuance to conversation and everything, and respect for one another, and it's just kind of ugly.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can get to a place where we can all get in a room and learn how to have conversations and hug it out and still move on with our differences and grow as a community of people.
I really hope so, because America it's about its people. It's great people, and they can do anything. You can do anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's either that or we're going to get to a place where we can't do anything.
Yeah,
except for
exactly.
stare at our phones.
Well, maybe that's enough politics, and I know you've got to get to a gig and everything. So your last tune here is Husker Du, These Important Years.
So this band, it's funny because
or is it Husker Du? Is that how you say it?
I think they called it Husker Du.
Yeah.
Husker, tomato. It took me years to realize what an influence Greg Norton was to me on bass. But he plays completely different because he has a lot of negative space and stops everywhere. But these little popping melodies and these descending lines and these little pieces that emote in the song are real important. Bob Mould wrote just heart-wrenching melodies.
Yeah.
And I just felt and I love the sounds. I love the lo-fi snare sound from the 70s, that sort of putting a t-shirt over a snare drum, that sort of sound. But the what it was for me, this song was the first of their songs that I really heard and felt like, pay attention to what's going on in your life, and again, where you come from, where you're going, where you're at. As a kid, again, it's like the light bulb went off.
Yeah.
Who am I, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think we should get into that.
Lastly,
yeah?
I guess if you, as a three-piece band, when I was 13, 14, if you could snap a line, everybody always says, oh, you guys are more related to the Buzzcocks or the Ramones or this and that. I think if you could snap a line from any band to Green Day, it would probably be closest to Husker Du.
Okay.
Them and the Replacements.
That's real insight.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Well, let's listen to the Husker Du, These Important Years, bearing in mind the connection with Green Day. Well, Mike, thanks for bringing that in. I don't know how long you're in town, but I think Dublin may be one of the few cities in the world that has a statue of a bass player. So I don't know if you...
I took a picture next to that yesterday, and Phil won. I mean, you want to talk about songwriting, bass playing, representing the bass. Great looking guy,
Wearing leather trousers.
Yeah. Well, and also, but what I heard in Phil Lynott had, to me, I could hear, he could take what would start off like cowboy song, would start off to sound like a folk song, which is traditional, and then start making it rock.
Yeah.
And you're like, damn, can you turn anything into a rocker? This is so cool. And he would always go to a place where, or almost always go to a place where I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Which I appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I was going through some of the records a few years ago just because I had a bit of nostalgia. I always feel like I really miss him. I wish he was still around.
Yeah.
And I knew him at the time. We hung out a little bit, and he was like helpful and offered advice and stuff. And I kind of realized how much I'd kind of taken from him, or how much he'd given me, depending on how you look at it.
I agree. I wished I had gotten into Thin Lizzy earlier.
Yeah.
and known more about it. Again, just not having records till I was like 17 and getting most of my stuff on cassette tapes, off the radio or from friends or whatever. I didn't get a substantial record collection till later.
I want to thank Mike Dirnt from Green Day for stopping by. Always good to spend time with a fellow bass player. Let's go out with some Thin Lizzy, followed by a bit of Green Day, and wrapping up the show with a U2 Green Day collaboration. For U2X Radio, I am Adam Clayton, and thank you, Mike, for joining me today.
You just heard Adam Clayton's playlist. Hear replays throughout the week or listen on the Sirius XM app. Just search Adam Clayton.